About 20 years ago, before he went on to make Shaun of the Dead, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, or Baby Driver, one of my favorite filmmakers, Edgar Wright, directed a hilarious sitcom called Spaced. One of the characters in that show was a painter named Brian. When someone else would ask Brian, "What do you do?" he would dramatically recite anger, pain, fear, aggression. So, when I looked at the list of topics to cover in this little lesson on dramatic writing, need, action, conflict, and stakes, I couldn't help but think of Brian's bit from Spaced, because that is a very dramatic little list to recite. Need, action, conflict, stakes. But those are exactly the topics we need to talk about in this little lesson on dramatic writing. Let's start with need. When you're starting to structure your drama, whether it's a play or a screenplay, you must have a protagonist, a main character, with a recognizable human need. Now, that's not to say that your protagonist has to be human. They could be an animal who does talk or a robot who doesn't talk, but they should be motivated by a need that is recognizable and relatable to a human audience. That brings us to action. Especially when you're writing a short drama, there should be one main action that your protagonist must take to fulfill that need. That means your protagonist should be active, not passive. That is, they should be the one who acts, not the one whom is acted upon. Also, since almost all forms of dramatic writing are visual storytelling, it's better if those actions are external and visible to an audience instead of internal and invisible to an audience. So, your protagonist's internal need should lead to external action, which takes us to the conflict. If it's easy for your protagonist to take that external action to fulfill that internal need, then your drama won't be, well, dramatic or interesting to your audience. Someone or something must stand in the way of your protagonist fulfilling their need by taking that action. If it's someone who stands in the way, we call that character the antagonist. If it's something that stands in the way, we tend to think of those as challenges and obstacles. Effective conflict creates what we call a dramatic question at the core of your drama, which must be answered by its end. So, on to the last item on our very dramatic little list of topics. What are the stakes? Simply put, the stakes are what will be lost if your protagonist fails to successfully complete their main action in the face of that conflict, or fails to act at all for that matter. So, what are some time-tested structures and their accompanying dramatic questions that could conceivably help you to create need, action, conflict, and stakes? How about A wants something from B, but B doesn't want to part with it. Will A succeed? Or A wants to be with B, but B doesn't want to be with A. Will A and B get together? Or A and B are very happy together, but their happiness makes C jealous. Will C succeed in destroying A and B's relationship? Or D is in a position of power over A, B, and C, each of whom wants to replace D. Who will prevail? These are simply 4 examples of time-tested structures that you could populate with characters with much more interesting names than A, B, C, or D to create a drama with the need, action, conflict, and stakes. Whatever name you give to, say, A, remember that character has to have a clear action that they must take to fulfill their need, and they must care enough about taking that action to overcome all the conflict they will encounter. If they don't care, if there are no stakes for them, if they fail to take that action, your audience won't care about your character much either, because there won't be anything at stake emotionally for the audience. So yes, it's a very dramatic little list to recite. Need, action, conflict, stakes. But those are the structural elements that your dramatic writing will need to enable your audience to make an emotional connection to your characters.